assure you that this issue has been a top priority of ours. Clay. This will help to elected officials, business leaders, and community partners has been steadfast in the minutes of December 9th, 2024 regular meeting.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 40?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Kolpak?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Turnberg?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 41. The expectation that Fargo should end homelessness has seemed to exist in our community for quite a long time. Yet we know that this is not just a Fargo challenge. This is a challenge for our neighboring communities and beyond. While many may not be fully aware of the efforts behind the scenes, the city team, including staff, elected officials, business leaders, and community partners, has been steadfast in pursuing a metro-wide approach to address this critical issue. We have heard a lot about housing first. It's an evidence-based strategy that succeeded in many other communities like ours. We know it works extremely well when it is properly resourced, when we stay true to the strategy and stick with it. Through work of many, we are excited to be broadening the approach and transitioning to a supportive role as we work towards implementing a unified vision for the FM Coalition to End Homelessness and the United Way of Cast Clay. This will help to evolve much of this important work to a broad consortium of metro-wide professionals who are experts in their field. The processes of government oftentimes require time to ensure decisions are made thoughtfully, transparently, and with the community's best interests at heart. This can sometimes create the impression that progress isn't being made or it's being made way too slow. However, I want to assure you that this issue has been a top priority of ours for many months. Chandler Eislinger, who is a recognized subject matter expert in issues surrounding homelessness, has recently taken the position as the FM Coalition to End Homelessness. In just 21 days as the executive director, her expertise and dedication are already making an impact as the coalition works collaboratively with partners across the metro area, especially the United Way of Cast Clay. This comes at a pivotal time when things are starting to come together. It's a perfect combination of collaboration, expertise, and opportunity to make meaningful progress in addressing homelessness. When we shift the focus of housing the unhoused into a one metro-wide strategy, we are truly giving it our collective all. This will be the unification of the region's metro groups. I would like to invite Chandler Eislinger from the FM Coalition to End Homelessness and Taylor Severson from the United Way of Cast Clay to share more information on this important work.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening. As mentioned, my name is Chandler Eislinger, and I am the new Executive Director at the Fargo Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with our work, the mission of the FM Coalition to End Homelessness is that we work in partnership to achieve permanent solutions to prevent and end homelessness, making it rare, brief, and one time. And I'm here with my partner from the United Way.
Good evening. My name is Taylor Severson. I have the great pleasure of serving as the Director of Community Impact at United Way of Cast Clay. And at United Way, we are uniquely focused on understanding our community's greatest challenges and working with our partners across the region to use data-informed solutions and focus on lifting families out of poverty. Our mission is to inspire and activate the community to improve lives, and we've been working to address, prevent, and end homelessness for a number of years.
Tonight, we're here to present a snapshot of homelessness that helps contextualize what we've been seeing in our community in recent years, as well as some of the trends in the objectives that have been identified throughout many years of our system working together. So for a little background, since pandemic era supports have gone away, we all recognize that homelessness has been on the rise once again in the Fargo-Moorhead area. In particular, unsheltered homelessness is reaching crisis levels. And especially in a region that has a deadly winter climate, intervention is more urgent than ever before. We have an incredible community of service providers that has demonstrated success in halting increasing homelessness when those necessary resources are adequately funded and supported by our local policymakers. We can see this in examples related to systematic reductions in veteran homelessness and the efficient use of ARPA funds to conduct rental assistance support throughout our metro area. And however, although increasing shelter capacity alone may seem like an easy solution to addressing increasing homelessness, the evidence-based long-term solutions to creating systematic and sustained reductions in homelessness require enhancements in homelessness prevention and the creation of additional pathways to permanent housing, which we will explore more tonight.
I think it's no surprise to any of us, as well as the residents of our metro area, that homelessness in our community has reached a boiling point, and that there has been this public discourse and public dialogue around how do we take strategic efforts to address homelessness at its root. And I think it's important for us to understand how the system works. As Chandler mentioned, the system has many components, and we'll talk about some of those components here in a little while. But when we think about the system as a whole, right now, what our community is experiencing is system overwhelm. There is more inflow into homelessness. The homelessness response system is overwhelmed. And as a result, there are some pressure valves in that outflow of the system or out of the system that have not yet been released. And so when we think about what does system overwhelm look like, it means that we really need to understand what the need for services is on the front end, while also helping people into permanent housing options and exiting the system overall, thinking about this really comprehensively from end to end.
So what are some of the things we can point to that help us understand that our system is overwhelmed? As you all are acutely aware, shelters have been either at or over capacity for several years. We know that our service providers who are members of the coalition and stakeholder groups have to turn more people away because there aren't enough resources to serve everyone, and the overall rate of homelessness has increased. The graph here on the bottom shows our point in time count numbers in Fargo over the last several years. And as you can see on that green bar, that overall rate of homelessness has continued to increase with a short period of reduction that really dovetails with the availability of some additional rental assistance supports that existed temporarily in the state. And so what we know and what we see as a community are the consequences of an overwhelmed system. Again, we know that unsheltered homelessness increases when the demand for services outweighs the availability of them. We know that shelter stays get longer when people are not able to quickly and efficiently move into permanent housing. And with those shelter stays becoming longer, you can see more and more people becoming chronically homeless. We also know, as you are acutely aware, that the public perception of safety decreases when we're not seeing that system flow the way it's meant to in preventing homelessness and maximizing that outflow into permanent housing. We've seen strain on our emergency services and an increase in their utilization when folks aren't well supported in permanent housing. And we know that the mental and physical well-being of those experiencing homelessness declines when their homelessness is extended beyond what is reasonable.
I mentioned earlier that at United Way, we're focused expressly on lifting families out of poverty. And we think about poverty and understand not only the causes of poverty, but also the consequences. And it's really important for us to understand how these systems play together. And I think that you could take these pie charts, for lack of a better term, and think about them with any community challenge. And we're gonna use these and think about the challenge of homelessness. Our homeless response system has a supply and demand challenge right now. Not simply a supply and demand for additional shelter, but when we think about the system at large, a supply and demand challenge related to the entire system. When a system is improperly scaled to address a community's needs around homelessness, you'll see that the available resources outweigh the focus population, the focus population rather outweighs those available resources, and therefore homelessness increases. When we see that gap start to close, and those available resources start to meet the need of that focused population, we're going to see in our community a significant and strategic systemic decrease in homelessness.
So as mentioned earlier, there are a couple of different strategies specifically that we know work to prevent and end homelessness. And really embracing those homelessness prevention strategies is what's required in order to minimize the inflow into homelessness. Like Taylor was mentioning on the last slide, we already have community partners who are working to scale up and are providing many of these resources in our community right now. However, we know that the demand for those resources is more than what is currently available within the system. So these are some examples of what categories of homelessness prevention can look like. There's a little bit of mix and match between all of the different categories in terms of what the interventions can look like. But it looks like things like rental assistance. It looks like support for mitigating an eviction, whether that's mediation services or other types of homelessness prevention strategies that keep people in their homes and don't force them onto the street. We also know that when an eviction or when losing someone's housing is inevitable, diversion is also a really important strategy in helping people avoid that homelessness altogether. What are the other resources, whether that's family or other types of assistance we can use in order to ensure that nobody has to go into shelter if there's another option available, or perhaps can move into even another immediate permanent housing solution, which we consider to be rapid rehousing. And so all of those different strategies are just some really high level examples of what homelessness prevention can look like in our community.
I'd love to highlight an area of success that our community has seen. Again, we have been alongside this work of preventing homelessness in our community for a number of years. Our investment in prevention and diversion programs at their current scale has already seen dramatic reductions in emergency services utilization for our community. What we're seeing is about a 5-to-1 return on investment when we think about infusing resources in prevention and diversion. Again, keeping people from experiencing homelessness in the first place. When we're focused on those sorts of priorities, we're able to save our community significant dollars in the long run. And these types of programs have shown that they're incredibly successful already. And when we have the opportunity to scale these to meet our entire community's needs, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we can see even greater savings, even greater investment back into our community.
So again, when we think about the overall system of the homelessness response system, we think about minimizing inflow into homelessness. When homelessness is inevitable, we think about how do we manage crisis and ensure quick access to shelter and hopefully quick access to housing. And this slide is really an example of how our homelessness response system currently works and how we currently address crisis. So everyone, we don't need to go into all of the minutia of this framework and flowchart here, but essentially when somebody is facing a housing crisis, they call 211, they access some of the resources available in our community, and it is determined what type of support is most appropriate for their specific situation. And then we use an assessment to help assign them to those types of resources that are available. Right now, what we're seeing is that folks are falling through the cracks kind of on both ends of that system. People who we could prevent homelessness for are falling into homelessness because those prevention resources are not scaled up to meet the need. And people who are currently experiencing homelessness, people who are currently living in shelter, are staying there longer because we're not able to maximize that outflow into permanent housing. And so that's really kind of what we're showing here, is that our system actually has a really incredible flow, a really incredible way of delivering services. We just need to make sure that all of the resources required are available and that we're moving those people as quickly as possible out of a crisis situation and into a more permanent one. So speaking of the outflow piece of that, so minimizing inflow into homelessness, that crisis response, and then maximizing outflow into permanent housing. There are a variety, again, different strategies that we can use in order to encourage that quick move into that more long-term housing situation. We've seen success in housing navigation and intensive case management services that really wrap their arms around individuals and help them address those other additional housing stability issues that may be related to not being connected to mainstream benefits, perhaps needing to be connected better to more mental health or recovery-based services. But it is once those folks are in permanent housing that many of those resolutions of additional issues can occur. We also know that maximizing outflow into permanent housing means supporting our landlord partners in any of the challenges that can come up from being a rental provider, and really leveraging that landlord risk mitigation fund to support any of those financial needs that landlords might find themselves in when they're providing such a service to the community. We also know that we need to develop and support innovative pathways to permanent housing, especially for folks who face barriers to accessing housing on their own, or self-resolution is what we tend to call that, because they have some complex backgrounds that prevent them from being able to get into that housing without that additional support. And then, of course, we also know that we need to preserve and increase the supply of housing, kind of across the continuum of housing, but especially with an emphasis on affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. And it's that mixture of all of those different strategies that really creates the conditions where people can move quickly into permanent housing, maintain that stability, and maintain long-term stability in addressing any other issues they may have in their life.
I'd love to highlight that while we're sharing a lot of information with you today about this community context, what works in strategies that are proven across the country when operated to fidelity, those things work really well. What we're also trying to share is that this work requires some technical expertise. And it requires those who are closest to the service of assisting individuals out in exiting homelessness, as well as all parts of the system. When we think about that technical expertise, that's some of what we're sharing today, is that these activities require that technical background, and some of those objectives being met are going to require the system to work together collectively.
So we'd like to move into some of the proposed objectives that have been identified. I've been working in homelessness for several years, and there are many trends that we can see in terms of both what we've already seen efficacy with in our community, and also those best practice solutions that we know we need to add to the kind of menu of services that are available. And I also want to note that all of the things that we will be discussing, although they are trends, they are things that the community has already been talking about. It is really important for us to continue to bring providers along, continue to bring stakeholders along in building consensus around those strategies, and making sure that we're matching the appropriate organizations and agencies in our community that already exist and scaling those up. And so these are ideas. These are things we hope to build consensus around. And they're also things that we believe will have the biggest impact and the biggest impact on long-term success in our community as well.
I think some of the things that you've likely heard from your teams, our collective community, is that folks have been desiring coordination. There's been a desire for leadership, and there's been a desire for a plan. And we know that this is a region-wide challenge, a metro-wide challenge. And so as we think about some of these proposed activities, this is really what we're coalescing around, is this shared community-based leadership and a plan of set activities with milestones that we hope to achieve, individuals who will be responsible for these activities, as well as our ability to ensure accountability to our shared objectives. So again, to echo what Chandler has already shared, these are our proposed activities and proposed objectives, but we know that in community-based work, sometimes it evolves as we go, and we may need to refocus or redirect where those priorities take us. So here we're going to just quickly run through these next 30 days, some of the activities that will be initiated. We know there are both short-term objectives and long-term objectives that will have outcomes tied to them. Those things will start to grow legs. We know there are things that are very simple that are are going to be low-hanging fruit for our community to achieve, and there are other things that are going to take more time to establish and build structure around. We know that this is going to require some level of financial support and financial resourcing. That is part of the reason that United Way of Cass Clay has supported this work for a very long time, is that we recognize the need to put resources behind homeless prevention and homelessness resolution strategies. We've identified some early infrastructure around that financial support need, and we hope to continue to mobilize that in the short term. We also know that our voices alone will not be the ones making decisions in a silo, and that as we think about moving forward with a consensus-built plan, it'll be really essential for us to consult community advisors and a set of community leadership who can help weigh in on these activities. We hope that you will join us in this work and continue to share your perspective and your expertise and your technical knowledge as it relates to our community-wide plan. And finally, we know that these key community partners, those who are already doing this work well, we need to ensure that we can empower them, or rather continue to empower them to do that work and to do it well across those service providers. As we look beyond the next 30 days, we have set some milestones, or rather guideposts, in what will guide us in the next 60 and 90 days. This is where we start to establish some of the things that will be initiated within this time frame, but will take a much longer time for them to be fully developed and fully built. So again, we really need to think about how we can reduce that inflow into homelessness, and this will be a coordinated effort that includes scaling up some programmatic support and direct community assistance. We also know that part of our community conversation has been around affordable housing, and that we're going to need to continue to engage with zoning and others about how we can encourage and emphasize an increase of housing units. And finally, again, this release valve that we need to focus on is exiting folks into permanent housing, so that those who have a housing voucher in hand or have access to permanent housing have the right types of supportive services to be successful and stabilized in permanent housing. And I think I said finally, but I did mean and also. Additionally, we know that our community does not need to be in this very same place a year from now. We do not need to be repeating conversations or brainstorming again next winter. We need to ensure that our community is well prepared to activate plans each time winter crisis happens in our community, so that we can ensure folks are cared for appropriately. And now finally, we also know that when we think about our community supports that engage with or interact with individuals experiencing homelessness, it includes community services like emergency rooms, jails, detox, treatment providers, and law enforcement at large. So it will be essential for us to have a very open and coordinated relationship with those agencies to ensure that we are preventing discharges into homelessness and really strengthen those cooperative partnerships.
And not to belabor the point, but again, this is a coordinated, cooperative approach to ensuring that we will see those systematic and sustained reductions in homelessness over time. It takes all of us working together, all of our different nonprofit partners within the coalition, our different government agencies, and all of the different sectors that touch homelessness, working in the coordination to ensure that we are investing in those strategies and scaling up the strategies that work. So we envision this diagram to have little X's on the people and stakeholders who have roles to play in prevention, ensuring that crisis response is as coordinated and tight as possible, and moving people quickly into those resolution strategies as well. So once again, in order to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time, we must work together to minimize inflow into homelessness, maximize outflow into permanent housing, and we will see a reduced need for crisis services and a systematic reduction in a rate of homelessness, again, making homelessness rare, brief, and one time. We'd love any questions and comments from
Any
the
questions of the
commission.
commissioners?
Certainly.
Commissioner Strand?
Thanks to both of you and to everybody on your teams for the work you're doing. It's amazing that down the road we're going to have a good story to tell, and we already do. I have a lot of minor questions, but the one overriding question in my mind is, we have a really caring community, and on an ongoing daily basis, all of us hear from citizens and people with ideas. You should do this. You should do this. If you'd only do this, where's the clearinghouse to share people's thinking? I don't know where to send this information and who to share it with. And I want people to know they're heard, and to get it into the mix. So when they share their best thinking, it doesn't disappear into the ether. Is that you, Chandler? Are you the homeless czar now? Or how do we get this into the system so that it gets vetted and received and processed and doesn't disappear? Because there's a lot of people with a lot of really, really good ideas, and they care.
Yeah, I think the Homeless Coalition really sees ourselves as that collaborative entity that embraces everybody who sees they have a role to play in addressing homelessness. And so if you receive a proposal and you're unsure of where to send it, you can absolutely send it my way. We do always want to make sure that whatever is being recommended by the community is also vetted against some of those evidence-based practices that we know exist as people who work within this sector, and that other folks in the community aren't always privy to or aware of, especially when it comes to some promising practices. But that being said, we welcome innovation, we welcome collaboration, and we welcome the ideas from people who feel like they have a role to play. And so although I will never refer to myself as the homelessness czar, they are welcome to communicate with us, to connect with the coalition, join our coalition meetings, participate in our committees, and leverage their ideas in those spaces.
And I know some commissioners have some ideas, so they're welcome to talk to you and visit with you about different ideas. There has been some discussion about reunification and relocation work as a component of this. Can you comment on that, if we have people that might be better suited to go back to their hometown?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor, for the question. I know this has been a topic of conversation in our community. And I think what I want to share with the public and our commissioners today is that relocation and reunification of individuals experiencing homelessness is something that our system does every single day. We have a variety of different partners who work to understand maybe how did you get here if you aren't from here, because that does happen. However, we do know the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness in our community are from our region. Perhaps somebody has a family or friends that they're looking to reconnect with. And so we use those organizations who have those funds and supports in order to connect that individual with wherever they're wanting to relocate to or reunify with a family or friend. And so that happens every day. And of course, our organizations need support to continue to provide those efforts, but it is a well-coordinated system that ensures that people are being matched with services to whatever community they may be returning to, and ensuring that they have a soft, safe place to land with housing, and that nobody's just kind of being sent somewhere without any coordination of resources on the back end. So it is something that we do all the time in order to meet the needs of the unique individuals that we're serving.
And we've been doing that for several years now. Is that correct? You've served a variety of people over the years?
Yes. Yep. There are many different organizations across our community who use that as a strategy, although we do prioritize ensuring that those who feel part of the Fargo-Moorhead area stay here and are provided the services and the access to housing that they want in this community.
Very good. Any other questions? Mr. Kolpak.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you both for being here and for the other partners in the room that are part of the Homelessness Coalition. First of all, this is a community-wide, really region-wide problem, and I appreciate the community-wide bringing solutions to the table with a number of organizations. The Coalition to End Homelessness has over 70 organizations associated with it. It really touches all parts of the community. So thank you for that approach and the collaboration. I also appreciate the fact, and we've had many constituents, to Mr. Commissioner Strand's point earlier, reach out to us with their ideas. But, I think one of the bigger concerns is this perception that the work hasn't been getting done. And it's really been for years, we've been trying to address this very challenging and complex issue. I can tell you in the last 9 months, truly, it's been a daily conversation in City Hall on what are we doing? What actions can we take? I know Assistant City Administrator Brenda Derrick, it's been her priority to work with city staff, but the collaboration with community organizations is so important if we're really going to solve for this problem. So those are my comments. I just have one kind of generalized, and I think you might have, just in summary of your objectives, the 30, 60, 90-day objectives, which is a really good list and to me very actionable, and it will build over time. It will be dynamic, right? There'll be feedback and transparency. Can you speak to how you ended up here now?
I'd love to start. Thank you, Commissioner Kolpak, and thank you for the opportunity to share more about how this work has started to coalesce. I absolutely agree that in our organization, this has been a daily conversation as well. How do we think about our role in supporting our community, and what is our role to support the community in this specific effort? And after a period of time and engaging with our board and other stakeholders, we've continued to hear that, again, desire for leadership, desire for strategic coordination, and desire for a plan. This is something that our organization has been deeply involved in historically. How do we help build the infrastructure for our community to then respond to community challenges? And so that's what calls us to this work, and is something that we see as part of our community infrastructure that will have a generational impact for people who live in this community in years to come.
I think we've also, there are so many different pieces that all need to come together at the right time. And I really appreciate the opportunity that we've had with the level of political will to engage in this conversation in such a public way. Our service providers have been doing incredible work for decades, and they are, quite frankly, the reason why we don't see more homelessness on the street than we see now. And so what we're being called to do is continue to scale up those efforts when our community is facing some really challenging situations with more people falling into homelessness. And so because that is our community circumstance right now, we have to step up to the plate as coalition members and providers to ensure that we are saying to our public and to our community members, this is what we know will be successful and this is what we need. And we're in that moment right now. And so we're just really grateful to have that platform and opportunity to share those evidence-based best practice solutions and build consensus throughout our entire community.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. I do have one speaker that wanted to speak to this, so I'll excuse you from the podium because I'll come to your podium. Lenny Wilds is here. Lenny Wilds. Well, I guess Lenny is not here. We'll go to public hearings 42. Thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate the support. And I want the commissioners to remember that it's a community effort. City of Fargo is going to step back and be a supportive role, and you guys are going to take this. So thank you very much.